Welcome, everyone. It's my joy to be able to speak this evening with an up-and-coming filmmaker, um, that of Halle Schaffer. And
Hello.
hi. And she's speaking to us from her home in Southern California. She is a high school senior, and that has. What does that mean this year? Are you actually going to school, or how's this working?
It means that somehow we're making online school work
Good for
until
you.
for the foreseeable future. Yeah.
Nice. Good. It's not exactly the senior year you had planned, but you're going to make the
It,
best
of course.
of it. Okay, so um, in addition to, I'm assuming if you are watching this, you are watching this because you've seen Marble Cake, and you want to know more because there's much more to know. And I want to say at the outset that there is a bit of nepotism here, and that is that Hallie is Arnie and Sue Schaefer's granddaughter. And that the short came to my attention the first time because Arnie sent it to me, like any proud grandfather would, and it is well borne out by the product. So, Hallie, let me ask you a couple of questions.
Yeah.
So, you wrote this. You
Yes.
wrote this piece. Okay. Um, how was the subject matter chosen? I'm sure curious about that.
Well, it's actually kind of a funny story because when I was bored during the summer, as you are, I was looking up writing competitions because that's how I fill my time. And I came across this writing competition where the prompt was describe a time where you felt like you weren't a part of your community. And so for me, that's kind of when I started thinking. And out of that came the short story that I wrote about my experience as an Asian American and also as a Jewish person. And so I wrote the short story and I sent it to my friend who's a cinematographer or who's an aspiring cinematographer. And she's like, we need to make this a script. We need to write this. We need to make this work. Because at the time she was actually doing an internship at UCLA for cinematography. And so we got together. I wrote the screenplay, and together we kind of just planned it out, and then it rest is history.
It really is terrific. Um,
Thank you.
and insightful. So, just so everybody understands, you all growing up, you were active in religious school, and I understand you taught religious school.
Yeah, so after I got my bat mitzvah, our school, not my school, our temple offers this Ozer program where once you become bar bat mitzvah, you're able to act as a teaching assistant. And so for I think it was 3 to 4 years, I taught Hebrew and I taught religious school to kindergarten through third graders, which was awesome. Great experience.
That is terrific. Oh, what a wonderful thing to do to contribute to the community as well. That's great. So this was the temple for you was not a place that was foreign. I mean, this is part of very much who you are.
No, yeah.
And was it your experience during that time period, though? And I think you alluded to this in the script, that there were occasions where I don't know whether they were people who didn't know your family or what, but kind of like made you feel like an outsider to your own synagogue.
Yeah, and so I want to also preface this by saying that I had a wonderful experience at Temple. Like that's why I decided to work there
Right.
after after my bar mitzvah. And I met so many people and I made so many connections with so many people. And for the most part, it was positive. But then at the same time, there is this sort of microaggression that you see where people will ask you certain things, and it's not through the wrong intention. It's just I almost want to think of it as a way of trying to understand other people, but then in the process, it does come off as you are this outsider and you are this person who is different in this community that for a long time, or like in my case especially, is made up of very similar people. And so having someone who doesn't look like you or who doesn't necessarily come from the same background. Like my mom has a very interesting background too. She grew up in Taiwan, and so she actually grew up Buddhist, and then she came to San Antonio. She ended up getting baptized, and this is a story I like to tell a lot of people. She became baptized as a Christian, but she didn't know anything about Christianity, and then when she met my dad, she ended up being integrated into the Jewish community. And so in a way, it was like me and her, we were going through this Jewish experience together. And in a way, my mom and I kind of shared this similar experience because we were both not treated like obviously we both made great connections, but ultimately you're looked at differently because you don't look like everyone else, which is yeah.
Yeah. No, yes. Yeah, bad. Nonetheless, you had a really neat experience. You know, you enjoyed your synagogue years.
Yes.
Are there things that you can think of that over the course of years you would have liked to have shared with, say, your rabbi or someone at the synagogue that would say, you know, I love it here, but
But you know, there's some things. Well, the funny thing is that you don't really become aware of it until you become older. So I actually began to notice it once I actually started working at the temple. Because when you're younger, like people say things to you and it kind of goes over your head and you're like, oh, well, that wasn't awesome, but like that's just kind of how people are. But then as you start working and people start making comments like that, I think back on my experience and I'm like, oh, people did say. And for me, I almost assumed that it was a normal thing. Like
Mhm.
it gets to a point where alienation almost becomes a normal thing. You're like, oh yeah, this is just kind of the way it is. And if you bring it up, it's hard. So like you said, do I want to bring it up to my rabbi? Yeah. Is it something that at the time I felt like was a big deal? No, because in a way I didn't know it was happening
Yeah.
until you reflect on it. And then you're like, oh yeah, that happened, you know? But yeah, I hope that was a good answer to that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to talk specifically about the film and some of the messages.
Mhm.
Um, I really love at the end when you've made the ersatz marble cake. um,
Yeah.
that what your ultimate point was that yes, they were mixed together, but the flavors were still quite distinctive, and you
Yes.
could still taste the flavors individually.
Hmm.
And does that reflect like your philosophy of society as ideally that there is a blending, but there's also a sense of diversity as well and respected?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I feel, and this is kind of the way, like over the past few years when I've actually been able to like develop and stuff, this is kind of the way I've begun to think about it, is that for the longest time, I mostly assumed an Asian identity because that's kind of how the world perceived me. But then as I grew up and I recognized that people have multiple sides to them, because like when you're younger, I don't know exact. I took psychology. I don't remember the exact term for it, but it's this idea that people are very one-sided and that you are this very concrete thing, but then as you grow older you realize that people do have multiple sides to them. And for me, for the majority of my life, I assumed that I had an Asian identity because that's the way I looked. But when I grew older, I recognized that Judaism is as much of my identity as my Asian identity, because both of my parents raised me in both of these unbelievable cultures. And I think ultimately with society, people, this integration of cultures, especially what we see in the United States with more and more people of different cultures integrating themselves into this one society, I think it's really a beautiful thing when, yes, people are different, but it is that beauty that makes them, it is that difference that makes them so beautiful, because they're able to have shared experiences with people and yet at the same time have this completely other identity that they can share with others. And I think ideally that's the way that the world should be. And and of course it's going to take a while because this idea of blending different cultures is completely new. I think up until the mid 1960s, people weren't allowed to be interracial couples, and
Right.
so obviously with the way society's gone, obviously it takes a while for people to get used to it, but I'm hoping ultimately that is the state that society can get to.
And your family is one that is interracial.
Mm-hmm.
And do you have any thoughts about that experience of growing up? And were there situations where the three of you were together, and people like were you could feel that, or?
Yeah. Well, there's actually four of us. My brother,
Oh, okay,
I
thank
said
you.
but yeah, so it's interesting because I go out with my mom, or when I'm out with both of my parents, sometimes I do notice like people are like, but I think it's become they're like, wait, but it has become more common, like especially in Southern California, you do see like more interracial couples, so it's become more of a normal thing. But uh, when I'm out with my dad, I notice it more. Like I make subtle allusions to it, but there were times when I was out with my dad where it's a weird situation because if you look at my dad and me together, he's a very Ashkenazi Jewish guy, and I'm not an Ashkenazi Jewish guy, you know. And so when you see the two of us together, you're like, wait, like what's going on here? And so people do make assumptions that way, and at times it's very not comfortable, but like when I'm out with my mom, like I look more like my mom, so it makes sense to people. And so it it's I like it's not necessarily a negative thing because I like to think that it comes out of ignorance, right? And you can't be mad at people for being ignorant. It's just a matter of finding it's just more of a matter of recognizing that there are certain situations that people haven't quite gotten used to. And like I said earlier, it's just a matter of getting used to it and exposing people to like, okay, this is something that happens. And even though it might initially be a little bit uncomfortable, like I feel like that discomfort is necessary to make genuine change. And once people recognize that that's how we do change.
I think I think to that point, the most dramatic moment of the video is when you you talk about the story where your father said, "When I'm out with you, I sometimes think the people don't think that you're my daughter,"
Mm-hmm.
and that was very, very affecting. And I
Yeah.
thought, as the writer, uh, revelatory and courageous on your part.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
It's a fun it's a funny story. I didn't show my parents the video 2 weeks, like until it was getting like significant exposure to people, and my parents were like, okay, we need to see it. And part of the reason why I didn't want to watch it is because I didn't want my dad to know that like I put that in there, because like it makes me feel like a little bit uncomfortable. And I know that for him it was a very, and it's obviously historical fiction, right? Like obviously there weren't people with white things on their face like passing me, and like that was my experience in Judaism, right? But it's some things were based in fact, and one of those things was that conversation that I had when I was 13, and at the
Hmm.
time it was like such a small thing, but then, and you know, you think back on it and you become a little bit sad about it. But again, I digress. It's just all a matter of discomfort and moving past it.
So, as a future leader of the Jewish people, um, what would you say to us about things that you would like to see different for your children?
I think one of the main things is just acceptance. And I think that's something that we do, that like especially in Judaism, some like not holding grudges. And one of my for my bat mitzvah, my Torah portion was about scapegoats, and it was like putting the blame on other people.
Mhm.
And a lot of that, and I think the main message I gleaned from that is that you shouldn't blame other people and you should accept people. And even though that wasn't the direct correlation with that, is that we shouldn't blame specific groups of people or we shouldn't blame certain people for our actions. I think one of the main things that comes out of that is, in order to not blame specific people, we must accept everyone. And for me, especially because I do have such a diverse background, one of the main messages that I do try to spread is that no matter who anyone is, no matter, like, this goes in terms of race to gender to like sexual orientation to whatever, no matter who this person is, even though you don't necessarily understand it, try to understand that person instead of like instead of making assumptions about them, because ultimately those assumptions are what is causing this tension that I initially experienced. And if I was unable, and if nothing comes out of what I experienced, then ultimately there wasn't any change. And so I guess what I'm trying to come out of this is just try to understand where people are coming from.
Right.
Like, try to put yourself in other people's shoes. That's like a cliche thing, but just try to look at it. Yeah.
There's a certain, it's interesting because within our own internal discussions, we've noticed this certain tension in that we were all raised as good people, that one of the signs of a good person was somebody who didn't see color, someone who didn't see differentiation. And now the message is see it and respond to it. And that's a totally different message. And for people of my age, one that is challenging. I'll put it that way. And I think it gets down to seeing other people in full, and not just the one slice you want to see them up.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's very, very interesting. So, at what age did you start getting marble cake for your birthday?
Oh my gosh, 4 years old. Since I was four,
Really?
we would we would get boxed marble cake from the supermarket, and we would make it every single year. Like, I think that was something that I did for over 12 years, if I want to say correctly.
Wow. With the strawberry icing all the time?
With the strawberry icing. It's like the Neapolitan cake. It is so good. It's so good.
I love it. I absolutely love it. That is great. What a nice, and that's the other thing is you have family traditions.
Yeah.
On top of everything else.
On top of everything else, I celebrated Passover every year. I go to a Chinese market, and then we just have our own traditions, like our Neapolitan marble cake. It is so good. Like,
there was Rabbi Bergdahl of Central Synagogue in New York published an article a few years back that I absolutely love, called "Kimchi on the Seder Plate," because her background is Korean. Her mom's Korean, and the fact that instead of their form of bitter herb was kimchi, it's bringing different cultures into the Jewish milieu, and this is what. By the way, historically, this is what Jews do. Jews didn't start off eating chicken and kugel. Those were adopted from Eastern European society. Jews were Middle Easterners. They didn't know about chicken and kugel.
yeah.
Right? This is all a manifestation of the ongoing history of the Jewish people.
Mm-hmm.
And the more diversity we have, and the more we look to accept things from other people's cultures into Jewish culture, the richer Jewish culture will become.
And that's the beauty of Judaism, I think. It's just having your own central culture and then being able to build off of it. And that's the beauty of human nature too. And that's the beauty of like humanity. It's just putting differences together and being able to bond through it.
Absolutely on point. Absolutely on point. I have to tell you that speaking with you is an absolute joy.
Thank
you. And you are you're going to be wonderfully successful, whatever direction you choose.
Thank you so much.
I hope that all of your ambitions, not only personal ambitions, but your ambitions for our society and for Judaism come true.
And I'm so happy to be able to speak with you today, even in our in our weird situation right now.
Well, let me say a good byproduct of the weird situation is 6 months ago I didn't know how to use Zoom, and this would not have happened. We would have had to trying to figure out how to tape record you. So this is so much better.
And look at where we've come. You've evolved. We've all evolved.
Thank you for being part of this. By the way, you framed this in a way, particularly with your Torah portion, that really spoke to the High Holy Day season and considerations of really not blaming others, which is a big issue within for the holy days. So I particularly appreciate that as well. And Arnie and Sue are justifiably proud.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank
All
you
right.
very, very much.
Thank you so much.